Guys, welcome back for another episode of It's Too Late. I am your host, Alan Mosley, joined as always by the number one producer in late night. It's Sherry Voluntary. Sherry, been doing any experimental medical treatments lately?
Of course.
I know that's what you normally get asked when the camera turns on.
Right.
So, guys, listen to this. We tried to advertise this last week's episode on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Now, I feel like at this point, we've been doing this show for almost 4 years. Wow. And I'm taking the money that our gracious audience has donated to us, and I'm reinvesting that into the program to advertise the show, because we got to get the numbers up. And here's the problem. We placed the Facebook ad. Facebook ad runs for 5 days. It's a modest ad. We don't make a lot of money. And okay, fair results. I mean, to be honest with you, the total reach was basically the amount of reach we would get if our current audience saw our posts.
Right.
But I'm not going to let myself go there today. Whatever. But Twitter and YouTube, namely, canceled our ad campaigns. YouTube in particular actually double flagged us. There was 2 reasons why they canceled our ad. The first one was that our ad violated their policy on talking about sensitive events. That's current sensitive events in the news that we might be exploiting for monetary gain.
Right. That the network news never does.
Yes, there's never been a single member of the corporate press ever talk about anything in the news and ever upload it to the internet and them ever be monetized. That's never happened before, and so by God, we can't either. But there was another reason why we were flagged. We were flagged for promoting experimental medical treatments.
Okay.
Now, Sherry, you were here last week.
Right.
Can you recall at what point in the show you and I talked about experimental medical treatments?
No, sir. I can't.
It's one of those things where it's clearly wrong, and it's clearly their broken algorithms flagging you unjustly. But the problem there is for one, you can appeal it, but way more likely than not, your appeal gets denied, because let's face it, they own the platform. They're going to do whatever they want. You have no recourse. Right. You have no recourse. And the second thing is that, talking about the broken algorithms and all that, is that we do a current events show. And so if I do a show and it comes out, of course, we do this lot. This is happening right now. And at Wednesday night at noon, and in a 24, 48, 72 hour cycle of the news, this is old. People have moved on to new things. We're already making our show notes for next week. Right. And so it's not like I can advertise the show for a Thursday and it get paused and us appeal it, and 2 weeks later they say, you know what, our bad, approved. It doesn't matter anymore. We've already moved on to the next show. And so anyway, with all that complaining about YouTube, and rightfully so, we are on Odyssey. You can search Alan Mosley TV or It's Too Late with Alan Mosley on Odyssey.com. Guys, don't just complain about platforms violating your free speech, censoring opposition, and things that oppose the official mainstream narrative. Go support a decentralized blockchain platform in Odyssey, made by the folks from Library. LBC Coin is intertwined with the platform. We're already monetized over there. We haven't been monetized on YouTube in 4 years. We're monetized on Odyssey right now. So go sign up through my link. Tip me all of the tokens that you get, and we will certainly consider thanking you. But if you're more of a listener than a watcher, you can also go to Anchor FM. Thanks to the folks at Anchor FM, we're now on all your favorite podcasting platforms of choice, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. That's Anchor FM. Once again, it's Alan Mosley TV. We're also dadgummit, Sherry. We're also monetized on Anchor.
Wow. It's almost like, that those platforms want their content creators to succeed or something weird like that.
Like, I want us to succeed. I want everyone else to fail. But then again, I'm not a platform. I'm me. So when other
Right.
people come on my show, I actively want them to fail, but I want us to succeed. And I don't know where I'm going with this other than to say, give us all your money.
Right. Do it.
Just do it.
Yeah.
You just go to alanmosley.tv, you go to donate, click 999.999.99. We used to do that all that. I think that was before your time, Sherry. That we used to, we did that. We did that on the old show when the former the distant second producer used to be on the show.
Goat master.
So anyway, Sherry, did you see on Twitter this past week the video of the Bobcat attack?
Right. Yes.
You did?
I did.
Guys, if you are wondering, I don't know what Alan's talking about. I haven't seen that. You are in for a treat. Sherry, roll the clip.
Good morning.
So there's Ned Flanders.
Got his coffee.
Got a chocolate cake.
Yeah, I think he's going Sunday go to meeting, so he's getting the potluck stuff ready, you know. Got it.
Got his shorts, but his long socks, like a good American. And then nature attacks. And when you see a rabid animal, what do? You look at it like a baby. And then what do you do with that baby that you don't want? You yeet it. Yeet that baby. Bitch, what are you gonna do?
Oh, shoot that fucker!
She's gonna roll on.
And then I'm gonna pull out my gun. Watch out!
A bobcat attacked my wife. A bobcat.
That's pretty great. Pretty great stuff.
Ladies out there who are watching the show, find you a man who will rip a bobcat off your back, fling it into the yard, and then bust a cap in its ass. Am I right, Sherry?
Yeah, that would have been so much better if he'd have been like just hesitant for just a second, like, oh wait, should I? Okay, I'll save her. Like,
oh my God. Well, I'm really glad we got this out of the way because there's really not anything important or exciting that happened in the news recently for us to talk about tonight. So that was really the highlight of the show. But if you'll stick around, we may or may not talk about some sensitive events recently in the news with our friend Suzanne Sherman. We're going to be right back with the meme of the week and the viewer mail right after this. So roll up.
If you're enjoying tonight's show, consider supporting the program by becoming a member of our Patreon. That's over at patreon.com/Alan Mosley.
Hey, Sherry.
yes.
What time is it?
Meme of the week.
Ron Paul disguises Federal Reserve as Nike store in hopes rioters will burn it down. I don't know how that's relevant to tonight's program. Do you know? I don't get it.
No idea.
Last week, we actually showed people the runners-up for Meme of the Week, and I decided I'm going to do that again this week. So, Sherry, show everybody the first runner-up for Meme of the Week. So this didn't work? Look at Nancy. Why couldn't they all have died of heart attacks when they bent over?
Lizards, they work different.
Yeah, Do you think that Nancy Pelosi can lick her own eyeball for moisture? And finally, the second runner-up for Meme of the Week this week. How many good cops does it take to change a light bulb? I'll let you know as soon as a good cop changes anything. Again, I don't get the relevance. I don't know how that has anything to do with tonight's show. We're not talking about cops in any meaningful sense.
No.
We're just talking about the weather. Speaking of just talking about dumb bullshit, let's go answer some viewer mail, shall we? I love that sound.
Good.
You ever think that you're a part of the dumbest show on television?
No.
Okay, good.
No, never.
Okay, good. Adam Sakozin asks, Dear Alan and Sherry, do you wear slippers when you go out? Do you ever go out wearing slippers?
Sometimes.
You do? That has to be a woman thing, I think.
I mean, I have some slippers that look kind of like shoes, so.
Okay. I have to have shoes that are capable of breaking toes if I stomp on people. So, Adam, no. But I'm also going to tell on Adam. The only reason he asked that question was because someone else had already asked a slippers question, and I should have read his second, and I apologize, Celeste. Celeste Annis writes, Dear Alan and Sherry, do you wear slippers at home? Sherry, do you wear slippers at home?
Not usually, no.
Yeah, I just don't wear slippers.
You're
But
Southern.
I've never known a man who said, oh, fetch me my slippers.
You do, though.
Oh, I do know a man who does? Oh, that's a damn
that would
shame.
be Mike of Mike and Friends, wears slippers a
Damn
lot.
shame. We're gonna run way over time in this week's episode, so we better just go ahead and do all the rest of your mail.
Right.
Andrew Avery writes, Dear Alan and Sherry, if an electric eel sees you wading into its territory, will it charge you?
Yes.
What? I feel like these questions don't count, Andrew, if it's not something that most of us will relevantly have to deal with in our lives. Like, how many times have you come upon the territory of an electric eel in your day?
Not many. Not many.
I met Andrew, by the way, like a month ago at the
Me
live
too.
show. And I can tell you what, I don't think Andrew's been around any electric eels. I'm just saying. Jonathan speaking of eels, Jonathan Carranza writes, Dear Alan and Sherry, do you like fishing? Sherry, do you like fishing?
I do like fishing. I haven't been in a long, long time, but I really do like it.
If you haven't been in a long time, do you really like it?
I do. Well, I mean, again, Mike of Mike and Friends.
Fair enough. You know what? I really don't like fishing unless you can shoot. If it doesn't involve a firearm and your prey, then it's just, you might as well starve.
Yeah.
Jeff Johnson, this is the last question this week, by the way. Jeff Johnson writes, Dear Alan and Sherry, haunted house or screaming fast roller coaster? Which would you rather do, Sherry?
Ooh, it used to be roller coaster for sure. Now it's kind of like I always used to like haunted houses. I don't really care for them that much anymore now either, but I think I'd have to go with haunted house now because I'm getting old.
So I actually would say pretty for sure screaming fast roller coaster. I've never been to a haunted house that I enjoyed even a little bit. Like, because I can't separate myself mentally from it. Like, I know it's not real, so I'm walking through it like, this is stupid. And if someone tries to scare me, I just tase them.
I could see
And I just tase them with my Glock. And so, yeah, it's ridiculous.
like a cop.
But you can't really remove yourself from the situation of being on a roller coaster.
It's true.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's real danger. Yeah.
So yeah, there you go. That's actually all the questions we had for this week. In a normal week, I would complain that we didn't have more questions, but we're actually going to be way out of time this week because of the totally not sensitive event that we're going to talk about with our guest, Suzanne Sherman, in the next couple of segments. Guys, we'll be right back after this break.
Your ad could be playing right now, reaching thousands of potential customers. Sadly, it's not, but it could be. Find out how to be an advertised sponsor for It's Too Late with Alan Mosley. Email us at info@alanmosley.tv.
Guys, welcome back to the show. Our guest today is the resident legal expert of It's Too Late with Alan Mosley, just so happens to be the host of Suzanne Sherman's The Wasatch Report, making her, what is this, Suzanne, like fourth or fifth appearance on the show? What is it?
I didn't know we were doing math today.
I'm sorry. Anyway, Suzanne Sherman, how are you doing?
Yay.
I'm glad to be here.
So how's the weather been out there in Utah, Suzanne?
Oh, well, I was just in California. It was 86 degrees on Sunday, and I came back here to
Ooh.
38 degrees at my house.
It is so funny that you say that. So we've actually been in the low 70s here, and I've been taking a lot of walks around the neighborhood here, and it has just been fantastic. I got to tell you.
Primo.
Primo, that's right. So, Sherry, how's the weather been out there in Knoxville?
Yeah, it's the same here. Like it was really nice, and then it got cold again, and then now it's getting nice again. It's like in the high 60s, so perfect walking weather and exerting yourself weather.
See, this is what it comes to when there's absolutely nothing going on in the news for us to talk about.
Well, when you posted that on your show page, that's why I said at least we have the weather. So here we go.
We always have the weather. I'll tell you what else we
Always.
have, ladies and gentlemen, is the verdict of the Darren Chauvin trial literally came in right as we were getting ready to do the show. I actually had a whole other show prepared, and when the verdict got announced, I immediately started sending messages to Sherry and Suzanne and everybody. I said, well, that show's out of here. We're going to have to talk about this. It's a very serious topic. I'm going to try my best to not make too much light of it, but I mean, you know how we are on the program. So, Suzanne, I'm going to start with you. Walk us through really briefly, if you could, exactly what charges Officer Chauvin, I guess former Officer Chauvin, I guess inmate Chauvin now, what
Right.
charges Derek Chauvin was found guilty of, and what the potential, because I know the sentencing is 8 whole weeks away, what the potential penalties are for those charges.
Essentially, he was charged with second-degree murder, third-degree murder, manslaughter too. And I think the day before the trial was supposed to commence, they gave the option of murder in the third degree. And my thought when I first heard that was perhaps that would make it more palatable to the court of public opinion if they pled it down to second degree manslaughter from murder 3 as opposed to murder 2. So, as we know, we kind of have, when it comes to people killing each other, a spectrum of culpability. First degree murder, as we know, is a premeditated murder with malice aforethought. That wasn't on the table here. But what was second degree murder, which is essentially a murder that's intentional, but that was committed in the heat of passion. And it is a way of acknowledging that somebody intended to kill another human being, but there were certain emotional components involved. Interestingly, one of the articles I read covering this story, I think it was from MSN, called second degree murder unintentional. Now, was that just a mistake or an idiosyncrasy in the laws of that state? I'm not sure, but this is more of the case that second degree murder, intentional killing in the heat of passion. And then we have murder 3, which involves a wanton, reckless disregard for human life. And then also manslaughter, second degree manslaughter. Again, we're on a spectrum. You can one can fall into another, which is really more of a reckless endangerment kind of a behavior with no intent to kill. Manslaughter is reckless behavior, putting the victim in a dangerous situation and an unintentional killing. I really thought the manslaughter 2 would be a definite, and possibly 3. 2 surprised me. I could argue it either way as an attorney. Would I support one outcome or the other? It's just a roll of the dice. I could argue both sides.
Leave it up to a damn lawyer to say that they could argue it either way, right? So let's break. Well, let's break down the gaps between the 3 charges, the top 2 and then the bottom 2, just really briefly, and then we can talk more about sort of the fallout and the philosophical conversation. So there's second degree murder, third degree murder, and then second degree manslaughter, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so.
Yes.
So the difference, let's start at the bottom. So the difference between third degree murder and second degree manslaughter. So I've always understood manslaughter to be that was stupid accident, that you could charge someone with manslaughter because maybe they got into some fisticuffs, maybe they were doing something that was and reckless endangerment, as you put it, incredibly unwise, and it resulted in the fatal injury of one of the parties. But it's not like they entered into, that contest or that Evel Knievel jumping over the buses. They didn't intend to have someone die. It was an accident, but their actions did cause said death. Whereas any degree of murder, I thought that, I do understand that first degree is premeditated, and that's an entirely different level of proof. But with any level of murder, there was an intent to kill. Like, even if it wasn't premeditated, it was, you knew your actions could/would result in the death of a person, and you did it anyway. So it definitely seems like there is a significant jump between manslaughter and murder 3. But just to remind folks at home, he was found guilty of all 3 accounts. So I know you already said that you felt like the manslaughter was a definite. Where was there some doubts then for third degree murder before we talk about second degree?
Again, third degree murder, you're looking more at wanton, reckless disregard for human life. That's going beyond the negligence that we're looking at for the second degree murder. So for, I guess, the third degree murder, I would have to look at, do you think that was his behavior justified? We can get back and forth as to whether or not this was actually standard police training. Was he supposed to do this? There were witnesses from his department that testified to the negative on that one. But with regards to the, I guess the murder 3, that's what we're talking about, right? The murder 3. You have to look at the circumstances, because by his own statements that he said that were recorded on his body cam, this was a big guy. We had to get him under control. We think he was on something. Those statements don't tell me that he was in any kind of fear for his safety and the safety of other officers. So did it become necessary to continue to kneel on this gentleman's body, either the neck or the shoulder? I've seen conflicting reports on that. So was that level of restraint appropriate for the circumstances? And I think that's something that the jury was probably looking at as well. So here there were backup officers around him. George Floyd was already handcuffed. He was face down on the pavement. Yes, he was being, resisting. He was resisting while he was in the car, saying that he was panicking and he was claustrophobic. Okay. So he's out of the car and now he's on the ground. Was it really necessary to have that degree of force on him for that amount of time? I think that's probably what the jury would have been focusing on. And I think if they're looking at that could justify reckless behavior, especially since there was some testimony that he was unconscious for some time while this restraint was being put on him. So when somebody's unconscious, clearly all resistance has stopped by that point. So why did he keep the pressure on him? I don't know. He just, all that was there was what he had said on the camera, because he didn't testify in his own behalf.
So you said a couple different things there that I really want to unpack separately. The first one being, and I've seen others say this as well, that what was perhaps some of the most damaging testimony at the trial for the defense was the testimony by other law enforcement experts, and I believe also the chief of police there, who testified saying that they unequivocally believed that Chauvin's actions were not textbook actions of someone that was subduing a suspect and had crossed the line into a different level of violence. And so, and obvious, I mean, that had to have been something that the jury took into consideration. But I want to pause there, because I know that leading up to the trial, before some of said testimony came to light, leading up to the trial, a lot of the conversation was centered around whether or not Chauvin himself was continuing to do what he was doing, kneeling on George Floyd, out of fear for himself or for the situation. You think of, you have this kind of building crowd around you, people whipping out cell phones, people yelling, and that was definitely a contentious part of the trial. But two, as you put it, that, well, let's say hypothetically, just for the sake of arguing, do we believe that the institution of policing is a separate thing from the justice system as a whole? And what I mean by that is that if the police say, well, look, here's our training manual. And in our training manual, it says if you've got a big guy and you think he's on drugs, you kneel on his neck for 9.5 minutes. Well, the police would say then that, well, look, that's just Officer Chauvin's just doing things by the book. Now, I understand that there were people who argue that he did not do things by the book. But even if I were to give it to you, that, well, look, I'm Officer Joe Bob, and I trained Derek myself, and I told him this is how you do things, and he did a good job. But does that make it okay? I guess is what a lot of people would say, is that even if your line of arguing is that, well, he's following his training. But if your training results in the death of a unarmed suspect lying on the ground who laid there on the ground and for 9.5 minutes and then unconscious and not speaking for the last few minutes, does any amount of textbook training make that okay? And then that's where we get into the concept of, well, if the justice system is separate from the institution of policing, then the justice system is going to have a say in whether or not it's okay, not just you telling me that you were following orders, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think I had made a comment when we had another conversation was, if somebody is going to go through the police academy and go through all these use of force techniques that they have, and if they're of the opinion that they're being given carte blanche to kneel on the necks of somebody that they consider to be unruly or possibly on something difficult to handle, particularly if they have plenty of backup all around them, I would think that an ethical person would walk out and never go back to the academy. That being said, I won't come out and say that unequivocally that technique is absolutely across the board unacceptable, because there could be a more dire circumstance where maybe there isn't as much backup. Maybe there are other perpetrators that are also a risk to the officers there. So I'm not going to come out and say that's unacceptable under any circumstances, but I'm concerned with what we saw here. Again, the man he was on the ground, he was handcuffed. There were plenty of people videotaping this. There were plenty of people there that were there for backup if the officer needed it. I just don't think that kind of excessive force, that extreme use of force, would be justified under the circumstances. If we as civilians have to use lethal force or any other force to defend ourselves in a situation, we're going to be judged by the circumstances.
Sure.
And we're going to be judged by a test, meaning would the reasonable person test, would a reasonable person under same or similar circumstances react the same way? And you have to look and see, the jury's going to have to be looking, was his conduct reasonable? And you had the medical examiner that conducted the autopsy. He said here in this MSN article that the restraint was the primary cause of death. So he actually testified to the causation of it. But he also mentioned that Floyd had arteriosclerotic and hypertensive heart disease, fentanyl intoxication, and methamphetamine use that were also significant conditions. That being said, he still did link the two together and show that it was a cause of death. Now, another medical examiner testified for the defense, and he said that the cause of death should have been classified as undetermined. So what do we have now? Well, in the larger context, we have the jury that's actually seeing this footage. They're seeing the situation that we just described, and it's going to be up to them if they can't determine the causation. How does this look to the public? We know the man died. We know that his neck or his upper body was being knelt on when he was face down for about 9 minutes. Do we think this was reasonable behavior? And, that's why you get this gamut from manslaughter in the second degree to murder in the second degree, with murder in the third degree in between. Often they have lesser included offenses. In the case of, like for here, if the jury was not going to find for murder too, it was pretty much a given that they could find for manslaughter too. I didn't anticipate acquittals across the board.
Well, so we're we're already going way over time. So we're actually going to talk. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the hyper politicization of everything and how that affects the Chauvin trial and verdict. And we're also going to talk a little bit about special privileges and how Suzanne sort of already opened up the door of how this case is being judged and viewed both in a court of law and by the public versus if it were you or me or anyone else involved in our own personal situation of self-defense, how we would be judged and how the circumstances would play a role. So we're going to talk about all that and more with Suzanne Sherman right after this break. Guys, welcome back to the show. We're joined once again by Suzanne Sherman of Suzanne Sherman's The Wasatch Report. So Suzanne, right before the last break, you had brought up talking about self-defense cases and how if this were involving a civilian or you or I or whatever, and we were involved in any type of thing that resulted in someone's death, there would be a very high amount of scrutiny as it pertains to the circumstances of that killing. It would not just simply be, oh, we feared for our lives, therefore we can just, take people's lives into our own hands. And rightfully so. However, I think, let's be honest with ourselves here. The Chauvin verdict is the exception, not the rule. Way more often than not, law enforcement is given the benefit of the doubt that when an officer or a group of officers says, well, we feared for our life, a suspect was being belligerent, we thought we smelled something, we thought we saw a gun. Often it doesn't have to be they had a gun, mind you. They thought they saw a weapon, and that's good enough. And way more often than not, they get off from that. So I want you to talk a little bit about kind of just sort of putting a period on the sentence of the circumstances of this case really playing to the verdict. And then talking a little bit about how often that's not the case for other law enforcement and how that would be the case for you and me.
Well, let's start with how that's not the case for other law enforcement. Think about that poor gentleman. Was it in Phoenix or Tempe, Arizona, or Mesa or Tempe, Arizona? Daniel Shaver. Look how he was crawling on the ground. And what basis did that officer feel that he had any reason to fear? He had his rifle that had "get fucked" engraved on the barrel of that rifle, aiming it, playing a sadistic game of Simon Says till the guy finally gets it wrong and he gets blown away. That case went before a jury. I didn't follow that trial. I don't know what the defense was. Not guilty. And he's getting a pension.
Yep. That's right. I believe the officer involved in that case is actually working somewhere else now as a police officer. I think he's actually working.
He's a police officer again. Yep.
So Suzanne, you had brought that up. I know people have made that analogy that, it's literally a deadly game of Simon Says and very well, that's, I think it's fair to say, but also people have brought up the fact that we're told that we're supposed to respect and honor these boys in blue and how they're trained professionals. And one of the reasons why they perhaps would get so much benefit of the doubt is because their job is hard and they're trained professionals. So we have to trust in their better judgment. But then so in case in point with the Daniel Shaver situation, you have an episode where again it's on camera, his body cam was on, we see the tape. You have a terrified guy crawling on the floor. He clearly has
Crying.
nothing in his hands, begging not to die, and die is exactly what he did because he was murdered. And 2 points to drive home about that. The first one being that, so that poor fellow, Daniel Shaver, he has to remain perfectly calm with a screaming terrorist holding an assault rifle, I'm going to use their trigger words against them, in his face. And you have to remain completely calm, no sudden movements. You need to be very present in the moment and not accidentally do something that other guy might see as offensive or dangerous. Vice versa, it's the officer who way more often than not can lose their cool, can treat you like scum of the earth. You don't matter. They are more important than you. They have the power and they don't answer to you in any way. This is way more often what happens. And so the consequences for the poor dead civilian are always way higher than for the officers, way more often than not. And yet the onus is on the poor, untrained, not used to high pressure situation civilians to maintain their cool, while these supposed highly trained officers with all the power and authority and guns and backup and everything else are allowed to lose their cool. And so I guess I do want to just come right out and say that I know there's going to be people that are going to say that they're not happy with the results of today's verdict. And I want to turn it over to you right there before I get into the over politicization of things. I'll tell you point blank, I'll be honest with you and with our listeners. I am perfectly content that Derek Chauvin is going to go rot in prison. What say you?
Yeah, I'm going to sleep just fine tonight. You know, we talked about the cops as the trained professionals. What about the trained professional that went to the wrong apartment one night and decided to murder the inhabitant because she was scared?
Amber Geiger,
not much of a penalty. Yeah, not much of a penalty for her. Trained professionals also know the difference between their sidearm and their taser. And when people want to keep giving these folks a pass who are supposed to be trained professionals again and again and again because their job is hard, because, you know, it's not easy doing what they do, this is going to keep happening. And while we also keep wanting more laws for everything that we fear is immoral in society, this is the natural, predictable, and entirely unavoidable outcome of having this police state. I mean, protect and to serve no longer means protecting and serving the population. It means acting as the henchmen for the overlords who have shown their vindictiveness and cruelty in recent current events that we don't need to discuss right now. But we know that we are being held to a different standard. So as we discussed with these other police officers whose conduct was inexcusable, if you or I were to defend ourselves in a manner that the state felt unacceptable, we would be prosecuted. And we do see incidents of that. What we would like to see is the police officers not having, you know, it's this feeling we get from the state. I think our good friend Mike Meharry uses this example. We can hit you, but you can't hit us. You have this feeling that nobody, if we had seen, Alan, if you were kneeling on somebody's neck who was prone, coming in and out of consciousness, somebody could have bashed your head in and it would have been justified because you were killing that person. But what do the people do when they stood around and watched George Floyd's life being snuffed out from under him? They would have gotten shot. They would have gotten arrested. There's absolutely no defending. Nobody can stand up and defend these people, yet you're supposed to comply and settle it in court. Breonna Taylor didn't get to settle anything in court. Daniel Shaver didn't get to settle anything in court. And now we had another one. What was his name now? Dwayne Wright, was that the one?
Yeah, Dante Wright, yeah.
Duncan Limp. We've had Duncan Limp,
and
too.
so, you know, we're seeing this happen again. You cannot defend yourself in court if you never get to court.
So it's funny that you mentioned that. It just reminded me. I know that there was a representative for the prosecution who had made the comment. I don't even think it was in court. I think it was in an interview or in a press conference where they said, that indeed there was. That on the one hand, the prosecution was arguing that no, Officer Chauvin had no reasonable fear for his life from a handful of teenagers in a growing crowd because there were other officers. The officers have all the guns. At that point, George Floyd is handcuffed on the ground. It's ridiculous for them to say, "Oh, a bunch of screaming teenagers were scaring me, so we killed him." With that said, he brought that up, that yes, I'll fully admit there's a growing crowd. You start to have this mob isn't really the right word because they're not actively engaged in anything per se, but you have this growing audience witnessing this act taking place, and a lot of them have their phones out. You know, they're recording it. Which, by the way, that's great. I don't mean to come off as being overly judgmental of people who are filming as opposed to taking part, because we need it on film, don't we? So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But with that said,
You could
Suzanne,
get tased or shot.
Suzanne, you're
Right?
exactly right that there was a lot of people who would say that, or let me go back. The representative for Floyd, or for the prosecution, had said that indeed there was this group of people, but they didn't. They obviously significantly outnumbers the officers on the scene, but they didn't stop Officer Chauvin. They didn't remove him from George Floyd's neck because they still respected the badge, but in that actually in turn meant that some of them were calling the police on the police. There were people on the scene that had called 911 because they were trying to get the police to come stop these policemen that were doing what they were doing. But I get what he was trying to say, whether he was a family representative or one of the prosecutors. I get what he was trying to say, but I reject it wholly. And the reason I do is that it wasn't a group of people don't intervene when they see police brutality taking place. Not because they deep down respect the officer, but really wish they wouldn't do that. It's because they're afraid. Let's call it what it is. People are terrified of the police. And they should be terrified of the police because the police can kill you and get away with it. This is what a huge amount of people in this country genuinely feel, that the police, so Suzanne, you rattled off all those examples right there. Is that of all these examples of instances where the police severely hurt or killed people and ultimately got away with it, or at least have not been prosecuted as of this conversation. And I know, Sherry, you had mentioned Duncan Lemp. In Duncan Lemp's case, hell, they just executed that guy, and that's the end of the story, right?
Yep.
That's perhaps the saddest part of this for most people. Maybe George Floyd's family gets to receive some justice. But for most people, when they get gunned down in a hail of bullets from police, that's the end of the story, you guys. It's over at that point. Yeah. Sure, maybe there'll be a little protest and a candlelight vigil, but we move on. We move on until the next one. So Suzanne, I'll turn it back over to you because I'm just getting my blood pressure worked up. But can't you? I guess I just spend a moment or two talking about how just understanding that while I might not be a black inner city youth who is marching with BLM, but I can absolutely understand that the issue isn't race inherently. The issue is the police state, and people are terrified of the police because the police are in a protected class above you and me.
Another example I meant to give also was the police officer in Virginia. Remember, it was a Black Army lieutenant that he pulled over, and his only crime was waiting till he got to a well-lit area, which even law enforcement agencies say, there are people out there pretending to be law enforcement officers. Go to a well-lit area, call the police if you're being pulled over and you're in a dark space at night, and that's what this gentleman did. And he was tased. And remember, that first officer, who was fired, by the way, did say, made a comment about you're fixing to ride the lightning, son. And then when the lieutenant said, I'm afraid to get out of the car, and he said, you should be afraid. It's, these bad guys that are doing this, they want people to be afraid of them. They're not doing this so they can go out there and help. And this is where the ego, I think, gets involved, where it's almost like they feel that their authority has been questioned, and then they get angry. He delayed being pulled over till he got to a well-lit spot. George Floyd freaked out in the car. We see this all the time. And then again, when people say you just need to cooperate, you need to comply, there was no level of compliance on the part of Daniel Shaver that would have been acceptable. I think also something else that might have contributed to the verdict was right during the time of this trial. Again, we had other shootings. We had that 12-year-old boy in the alleyway. We also had, and again, I'm not going to get into the culpability and the acts on his part or anything, but also Dwayne, what was his name again? I keep forgetting his name. I
Dante
have it all
Wright.
written. Yes,
Dante
Dante,
Wright.
sorry. Dante Wright, and we had these other incidents happening, and I also think the politicalization of it and comments by Maxine Waters, none of that helps. She should have just kept her big mouth shut. I do think that there was probably an element of maybe the jury members saying, hey, we better convict or our community's going to be destroyed. I'm not sure if that happened one way or the other. I think probably it might have also happened is these other events happened during the trial. Maybe people are saying, you know what, we want you to convict. We've had enough of this. And if Chauvin's the sacrificial lamb, we've seen people that are pro-law enforcement saying he's a sacrificial lamb. They have to, throw him into prison just to keep everybody happy. That's not a solution. The solution is stopping qualified immunity, stopping civil asset forfeiture, ending these nonsensical drug wars, stop the militarization of the police. And here's one that the conservatives are going to dislike. Stop putting veterans in the police forces.
Yes.
These people have been trained to kill. They've been trained to go overseas. And what do they say when it comes to the assault rifles? Weapons of war do not belong on American streets. Well, that even includes the people that are holding those weapons of war because they have been trained to be weapons of war. We, people living in America, are not the enemy. We need to demand that they stop treating us like the enemy. Sick of the riots? I get it. What good has asking nicely done?
Well,
Hero.
so you already opened up the can there of the politicization of that, and I have a few comments I want to share on that. But Suzanne, I'm going to pitch it back to you really briefly. I know that you did a little surveying of your audience before we got together tonight to talk about this, and you were asking folks what they thought about the verdict. Did you want to share some of the comments or just the general mood that you got from some folks before we go on?
It was pretty much across the board. It was, some of them thought it was a travesty of justice, that the verdict was only motivated by the desire to keep the calm and to avoid riots. There were others that said this was flat out murder and it was absolutely just. One of them said that George Floyd was the reason he got killed. He should have complied. So, and then very little in between. What did bother me was I didn't see the things that needed to happen for this to end. And that's the list that I just gave you a minute ago. We have to talking, or we have to change the conversation to red team, blue team, and think what real changes can be made to stop this from happening.
Mm-hmm.
There should be a significant reduction in the encounters that people have with law enforcement. They shouldn't have to be, we have victimless crimes. I think we had discussed that before also about having every nonviolent drug offender released from the prisons. We're seeing laws that are just nonsensical. And we've certainly seen with, certain businesses being closed, the past year, that probably has made people less patient with law enforcement. But notwithstanding the behavior we've seen this past year, people are still supporting them, even though we've seen the drastic impacts it's had on people's families and their businesses.
So on that note, I do want to mention, because we on this program are not really a part of the left-right political paradigm. If whether you're a leftist or a right-winger, you're wrong. So, but with that said, there's plenty of blame to go around. I have a lot more to say about my righties, but we'll get to them last. As it pertains to the left wing, this is why I can't take the left wingers seriously on this topic. This is it. The left wingers they understand that police are a problem, but they don't. And they may even want to abolish police, defund the police, all that. And hey, right on. I'm right there with you. If we're going to snatch up all the weapons of war, start with disarming all cops. That's where we'll start. So I'm right with you, buddy. But here's the problem. They don't really want to get rid of the institution of police. They just want to be able to control the boot. And that is quite evidenced by the fact that the same people who are out there rioting and protesting over things like Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, and countless other examples that you listen, and those things deserve to be rant and raved about. But those same people then are perfectly content to have law enforcement enforce the laws and regulations they like, such as gun control. The two things that absolutely kill the left on this, the left is an embarrassment to itself on this, is gun control and the fact that they elected Biden-Harris. Biden, the author of the 94 crime bill, and Harris, probably the most vile, despicable, corrupt, just POS's cops that have ever walked the face of the earth. And they elected them to the executive chair. And then certain, last but certainly not least, gun control. Way more often than not, that is the political chasm that supports gun control. And it just doesn't reckon that you would want to in some way hamstring, if not outright abolish, the police state, but then turn around and also say you want to disarm the population. The two biggest issues there being, number one, who's going to disarm the population? You're going to need that police state to disarm the population, and then you're not going to be happy with the way they go about doing it. And the second problem is that when the police aren't there, everyone likes to talk about the meme of the rooftop Koreans. You know, there's a riot going on. The Koreans are up on top of their business with their rifles, and then they don't get looted. Funny thing that, because armed people being allowed the agency to defend their lives and property way more often than not come out ahead. And you're going to need that in a world where you don't have the police. I want a world, just to be clear, I want that world. I want the world without the police state as we know it. But you're going to have to then allow sovereign individuals to defend themselves and their property. But that's the left. Now let's get to, we've actually talked about Republicans probably the last 3, 4, 5 episodes on the show. And I'll just be damned if conservatives don't just keep one-upping themselves on just how useless and pathetic they are. And I'm not going to call on any names, but Suzanne, I saw your thread, and I know for a fact that a majority of the people that felt like justice was not served today were of a right-wing persuasion. Would you say I'm being fair in saying that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So here's the problem, my right-wingers. We've even shared these memes on the show before. Folks, when those Democrats the demon rats that you are afraid of getting into office that are up to election fraud, and QAnon said that they're going to hoodoo you and they're going to put their lizard people in, when those people get in and they pass all sorts of laws to restrict your rights and liberties, who do you think will enforce it? It will be that thin blue line that you prostrate yourself to, will be the ones who enforce all the laws you think are immoral, unethical, unconstitutional, whatever you want to call it. They're going to be the ones. We see the footage all the time when they're dragging people out of churches because they're not allowed to have service right now for a reason that we're not going to mention on tonight's show. When you see them hassling frail old men on the street, when you see them escalating, you brought up the Army lieutenant who, it's ironically enough, and look, I have no love for the troops either, by the way, but it's the Army lieutenant of all people who's trying to de-escalate, while the pigs outside the SUV, they're trying to escalate. Let's be honest with ourselves. They're trying to escalate because they don't fear you one iota. I don't believe a single officer who uses that defense. They have no fear of you because, and this is getting around to the big topic of really our whole program here, we are against the state. And what does the state have? A monopoly on violence. That is and will always be the single biggest reason why I will always disapprove of the police. There are no such thing as good cops. They are all feeding into that system, and that system is inherently broken from the word go if they have a monopoly on violence. So Suzanne, I'm going to let you have the last word because we're going way over time. Did I say anything right then that was incorrect to you?
No, I think you got it. Thank you so much for having me back.
That's all you have to say. How dare you? Suzanne, just because you did that, we're going to have to get you out of here on this one. Are you ready?
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you, since I know that you were actually the devil that gave us this question. Is a bagel a donut?
No.
Suzanne wins, everybody. Suzanne, you won the prize. You're going to get to go on to the main event, but we're out of time, so we're going to have to do that another night. Suzanne, where can people follow and support you?
SuzanneCSherman.com is my website, and I have 2 shows on Anchor FM, The Wasatch Report and The Red Hot Chili Prepper.
Do you guys like how I just disarmed that whole conversation with the food question? That's what we do here. We bring people together on this show. Guys, thank you so much. We're going to be back for the finale right after this. Don't go away.
Hi guys, it's Alan here, and I want to take a moment to let you know about one of our supporters who started a new business. Laura Moreau sells 50 different health and wellness all-natural products, from weight loss, supplements, energy enhancers, body toning, longer and stronger hair, and so much more. Do you like coffee? Well, they even have coffee that'll help you drop some pounds. And who doesn't want to drop a few pounds? Go check her out at her online store at lauramoreau.itworks.com today. That's lauramoreau.itworks.com. Like our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/AlanMosleyTV. You can follow me on Twitter. That's twitter.com/AlanMosleyTV. Subscribe to our YouTube page. It's youtube.com/AlanMosleyTV.
Guys, remember we are also on Odyssey. You go to odyssey.com just search Alan Mosley TV or It's Too Late with Alan Mosley, as well as we're on Anchor FM. That's all your favorite podcast platforms, Spotify, Google Play. So go to Anchor FM. We're monetized on both of those. Go to them. Give us your money. Sherry, do you have a final thought?
No.
All right. There's no final thoughts, guys. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week.